Welcome, everyone, to the March Lunch with NEMA. This is Heather Riggs in the New England Museum Association's office here in Arlington. Scarlett Hoey will be with me. We have a little bit of a large group today, which is awesome and amazing. So to get the chat started, I want to see where you guys are actually dialing in from. If you guys should just put the chat feature where you're at, that would be great, so you can see exactly who's on the call with us, because we do have some new names. If you're new to Lunch with NEMA, this is actually going to be how you're going to interact with our presenter, Connie. So if you have any questions at all at any point during the presentation, go ahead and type them in there. We will also be having more of a Q&A session at the end of the lunch, but we will be fielding those questions for IMLS there. Great. You guys are from all over New England, all the way from Upper Maine down to Connecticut. Awesome. And North Carolina, which is awesome too. Great. And I also want to let you know that today's lunch is being recorded and will be available on the NEMA website later on this afternoon. If you ever miss a lunch with NEMA, we are recording them, so they are available on the website. Great. You guys are getting going here. Awesome. So Connie, I just want to start off by saying congratulations on your increase on your budget. We were all super happy to see that, and I want to thank everybody that's on the call that actually contacted the representative to sign on to the letter for the Office of Museum Services support letter. They had a record number of people actually signing that letter, which is amazing, and really happy to see that all of the advocacy that everybody is doing actually pays off. It does work.
It absolutely does, Heather. And boy, you all please accept our thanks for that too. We know, I'm sure everybody understands, we're not allowed to say a word about this during all of those proceedings, but we're really glad that you did. So thank you.
Yeah, we did have quite a large group down at Advocacy Day earlier this month, so that was amazing. So I'm actually going to get us going here because I know we have a lot to cover because, you know, who doesn't like to talk about grants and money? So, Connie, I am going to push it over to you if you just want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself. I think we're all pretty familiar with IMLS, but for those that aren't, good refresher.
Well, absolutely. Thanks, Heather, and thanks, Scarlett, and thank all of you for tuning in today. I have to say I am really honored to be with you and happy to have the chance to be part of a series that I lurk on quite frequently. So I benefit from all of the lunches with NEMA, and you all have a terrific organization. You convene a wonderful conference every year that I've been privileged to come to a couple of times. And you give a huge service to the museum staff and museum field more broadly. So thanks for that.
Thank you for that.
I'm a supervisory grants management specialist at IMLS. I'm in my 8th year of working with applicants and grantees, and it is a thrill for me to watch them do impressive things with relatively modest amounts of federal money. And what I want to do today is use that experience that I've had, and some of it's formal training, but more of it is just working through many hundreds of applications to make some suggestions for how you might want to maximize your chances for getting a grant. I think it's easy to describe the process, and what you've got on the screen here is sort of my tongue-in-cheek summary of it. Choose a grant program, right? We have several, and we have different numbers every year. You want to scale your project to fit the funding requirements. Then you just prepare the application, submit the application. You do that correctly and on time. That's easy, right? Then you wait for about 8 or 9 months, and then you open up the funding decision email. But as anyone who's gone through this knows, in reality, each one of those first 4 steps has a whole lot of sub-steps and lots and lots of nuances with each. So we already offer, one of the things I did not want to do today was to duplicate what we already do in other venues. We've got quite a large number of resources on the IMLS website, and here are links to them. And Heather, I think you prepared a distributable form with these live links, so if anybody wants to explore what we have on our website, it's probably easiest to go this way. But starting with the written guidelines, which are now called Notices of Funding Opportunities. That's the workbook for creating an application. We do how-to webinars, and we record those and have them posted on our website for folks who can't log in because it might not be a convenient time. We post sample applications that reviewers have identified as excellent models. We've got a tutorial on using logic models in library and museum projects. We post the instructions that we give to the peer reviewers so you know exactly what we're going to ask them to do when they read your proposal. And we've got a searchable database of grants that we've awarded in the past, and we also have a series of PDFs of publications that we've created that relate to one or more aspects of work that's being done by museums and libraries, and those represent a pretty long time span and a wide geographic distribution. Staff names are, with their email addresses and phone numbers, are listed on the landing page of the Notices of Funding Opportunities for each grant program. And there's also a list of all of that for us in the Office of Museum Services at the end of this presentation. And I mention that because the website is one place to get a lot of information. Calling up and having a conversation is another way. And we really, really, really encourage people to do that. We also give presentations and deliver workshops at museum conferences throughout the year. And the central goal of that is to bring information to those who might want to apply for support through our funding program. So it is actually a big part of my job description to make sure that the folks who are eligible to apply for our funding know about it and that they get every bit of help that they need in order to be successful. What we're going to do today, though, is focus on a few things that relate directly to preparing the application. And we've heard more than once people say, well, okay, what do you mean by that? Or what do you really want then? And that was the inspiration for the title of this presentation. So what do they really want? Let's start with a really quick look at some things that are very easy to do. Okay, following the instructions, and we put in parentheses there that we have to. There's a reason for that, but the phrase may sound patronizing and it sounds so basic that you don't need to hear it. But in federal grant making, we often don't have any choice except to penalize you for not following the instructions. The most common failure that we see is submitting an application after the deadline. And if the instructions say applications must be submitted by 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time on a certain date, please believe it, because if it comes in a minute late, we have to reject it. The closest somebody has come since I've been at IMLS was a museum on Pacific time, and they forgot that, I think, that we're on a different time here in DC, but they were 9 seconds late. And you can imagine the heartbreak, all of the effort that you put into fashioning a proposal and then to miss it by 9 seconds. But it's the nature of the thing. We have to do it that way. Most documents that you'll prepare to upload as part of your application have a page limit. And we are required to remove pages that are in excess of that limit. So if a grant program that you've chosen says your narrative cannot be more than 7 pages, and maybe it comes out fine in Word, but when you convert it to a PDF it comes out 8 pages, we have to take the last page away. And then we insert a page telling reviewers that we did that. So it's not good for your reviewer to have to drop mid-sentence or mid-paragraph and not know what the rest of your content was. Schedules of completion are limited to a maximum of 1 page per year. So a 2-year grant gets 2 pages, 3-year grant gets 3 pages. Strategic plan summaries and resumes have a maximum of 2 pages each. Organizational profiles and abstracts can only be 1 page. So it really is worth keeping track of that, and again being sure that your Word document doesn't spill over into an extra page when you convert it to a PDF. Want to make sure that you use the current forms for the grant program. Resist the temptation to use the one from the previous year, which would make all the sense in the world. But it is very likely that that form has changed. And in other cases, we know that our forms will get cached in computer systems. So it's best to assume that they change in some regard every year, because actually they do. And in some situations, a wrong form can be just about as lethal as a missing form. And speaking of missing things, make sure you prepare and upload all the forms and all the documents that are required for your grant program and project type. And the instructions tell you what you need. You just want to check and double check that and call us if you have any questions. So those all easy things, right? Another easy thing to do is make good choices. And you'll have several points at which you can do this, and all it really involves is being thoughtful and asking questions if you're not sure you understand the alternatives. Lots of our language is in what we call internally Fed speak, right? And it has to be because they're legal documents, and it's always not completely clear what we're asking for. But at any rate, spend the time weighing choices early on in the process so that you don't find yourself trying to rework everything the week or the day before the application is due. And after you choose a grant program, the next most important one is likely that of choosing a project category. And I say that because your choice of project category will determine the questions that you're asked to address in your narrative, and in some cases the additional documents you'll need to prepare and upload as part of your application. So it's an early decision and one that cascades into lots of other relevant elements. Another important choice is that of funding level. Some of our grant programs have more than one, and funding levels can dictate the cost share requirement, which is a really important concern in your overall planning and your budget preparation. And the last one here is choose your supporting documents carefully. Long time ago, we used to have a 20-page limit on supporting documents, and then we went digital, and we don't have that page limit anymore. But we do encourage applicants to include only those documents that supplement the narrative and that support your project description. We recommend that you be respectful of your reviewer's time and avoid any temptation to include hundreds of pages of extraneous material that's not directly relevant to your project. The maximum that I've had was a 750-page application, totally legal, went out for review. And I heard later that the reviewers would say, I will never ever hit the print button again without making sure that I understand what I'm printing. But at any rate, being judicious here really does work to your benefit. So include what is important and helpful and then stop there. And the last thing I want to call out in this context is check your math as you go. There's a good amount of arithmetic in preparing grant proposals, and like all such endeavors, the results are best when all the underlying counts and calculations are correct. As you work through planning your project, you want to be sure that your basic counts are accurate. So how many programs do you want to deliver? How many participants do you expect for each one? How many people will you need to bring that off? Or if you're doing a collections project, how many objects do you plan to involve? How many treatments do you expect to execute? How many digital photos do you need to take? And then what supplies and equipment will you need to buy? Again, as specific as you can make it. How many of them do you need? How much is the per unit cost? With those numbers as accurate as you can make them, next step will be estimating the time in numbers of hours that it will take you to get the work done. And if you can do a dry run to generate a backup for your numbers, do it and then report that in your application. Reviewers really appreciate that. If you are going to base your whole project budget on that it takes you 4.5 hours to process an object from beginning to end, then give some support for how you know that's 4.5 hours and show how many times you've done it to get to that average. So you'll be well prepared to use subtotals and totals that you generate as you go along in this way to prepare your budget and then to do your cost share calculations. These are 5 slightly harder things to do. We just got done talking about the easy things. These are a little bit harder, and it's where we'll focus the rest of our attention today. As a reminder, I want to make sure everybody understands, I'm going to make suggestions here, but I can't make guarantees. So this doesn't work in the way of if you do everything that is outlined here, then you're guaranteed a grant. We wish that it were that way, but these are just suggestions based on experience, based in part on the questions we're asked by applicants. but also what we hear from peer reviewers about what they would like to see in applications. And in the end, it'll be up to you to use what we talk about today in conjunction with the guidance that you get in the Notice of Funding Opportunity, in the webinars, and the broadly relevant guidance from the federal government to put your project in the very best possible light. For Museums for America, which is our largest grant program, there's a requirement that you put in a summary of your strategic plan. And the goal of that program is to help museums live into their strategic plan. The requirements are written as you see on the left. It's you get a 2-page limit. It has to be in a PDF. Reviewers will use the summary to understand how your project activities will further your institutional goals and objectives. That's one of the things we ask them to look at. And you should indicate when and by whom the plan was approved. So those are instructions, but they're pretty broad. What we recommend is use a narrative format rather than infographics or highly designed imagery. We get those sometimes, and they can be very, very effective for communicating your story to your public or to your board, but to a reviewer who's sitting in their apartment or their office reading your application without you to explain it, it's really best if you use a narrative format. You want to make sure it's very well written and thoughtful and easy to understand. Your strategic plan may be many, many, many pages long, and you get to summarize it in 2. So you want to use those 2 pages really well. And we encourage you to focus so that it confirms that solid connection between your institution's strategic plan and your project's activities. Reviewers ought to be able to draw a straight line there and have no question that this project is going to help you live into your plan. Just about all of our grant programs require a project-based design, and that means it consists of activities that tie directly to addressing a museum's key need, problem, or challenge. You'll see that language a lot. And you'll need to identify that in your abstract and the project justification of your narrative in the project results section of your narrative. And we ask reviewers to weigh in on how well you defined your need, problem, or challenge that you'll be addressing and how solid and relevant your evidence is for identifying it as such. They'll also be asked to assess how well your intended results are linked to the need, problem, or challenge that you propose to address. So clearly this is an important thing to do. If it's hard to envision, and I should back up for a second. One of the things I always like to point out is that needing money that can't be your need, problem, or challenge. It may well be at the end of the day, but we're looking for something a little more complex than just needing money. But if it's hard to envision what the need is, because you know where you want to get, and oftentimes people will think in terms of goals and outcomes, but try thinking backwards. So keep in mind that the federal government wants its investment in you and your institution to result in something getting better. So you want to be able to articulate what that will be with as much specificity as you can manage. Will somebody be learning something? Who will that be and what will they learn? Will collections be better cared for? Will they be more accessible? Well, which ones? And accessible by whom and how? Will segments of your community be better able to work together because of your project, or to live together, to overcome barriers? Well, which segments and what barriers? Then think through why it's important that this change happens. It's most likely to address a problem, right? So what is that? Are newcomers to your community having a hard time navigating the new culture into which they've just dropped? Is the long-term preservation of your collections at risk because your temperature and humidity levels in your storage area fluctuate wildly through the year? Because collections are stored in acidic or unstable containers. Is your museum's interpretation of a particular theme out of date and failing to take into account maybe recent advances in museum education? Well, once you've put words to your need, problem, or challenge, then gather data that support it. Surveys, census data, research studies, literature searches, and syntheses are all really good possibilities. And now that you've got what you need to describe the problem you're going to address, you can explain how it was identified, and you'll have the basics for justifying your approach and then for identifying your project results. We've already noted that most grants require a project-based design, and as we've said, we mean that it has a project work plan that consists of a set of logical, interrelated activities tied directly to addressing that key need or challenge. People typically carry out activities, so activities have a role in defining your project staffing, and they're also key to the schedule of completion that you need to create and submit with your application. A schedule of completion is defined by activities that are presented in sequence and assigned to some kind of a time frame with a beginning and an end. You'll see activities in the description of how to prepare a budget, too. Our form accommodates up to 3 years of project activities and associated expenses. And if your project is funded, you'll write your performance reports from the perspective of your activities. We ask you very directly, what activities did you propose to complete during this 1-year reporting period? And what activities did you complete? And if there was a variance, what was it and why did it occur? So what do we mean by activity? Well, we think of it as something that somebody does. And they do that intentionally. And it's the result of advanced planning and scheduling. It's got a beginning and an end. And you should know when you're beginning it because you're doing something, right? And you should know when you finished it because it doesn't need to be done anymore. An activity is not a goal. It's not a result. It's not an outcome. Rather, it's a thing that you do to achieve one of those. And very importantly, you want to aim, and this might be the hardest part, you want to aim for a reasonable level of granularity in identifying your activities. Because if you're too general and all-encompassing, it'll be really hard to track your progress. And if you're too detailed, you can get lost in the minutia, and that makes it difficult to see the bigger picture. So you probably don't want to list every meeting that you'll have throughout the lifespan of your grant as an activity, but then you want something a little more refined than simply saying we're going to rehouse all our collections. Okay. A recent requirement in federal grant applications, not only the reapplications but the review and the monitoring, relates to risk. And in your project work plan, we ask you to identify the risks to your project and how you'll account for them. We get lots of questions on this, and it might be the language that's off-putting, but all projects have risk. And in fact, everything that we do every day has a risk associated with it. What's important here when you're seeking money through federal grants is taking time to think through what might go wrong and devise a plan for reacting to it just in case it does. You're basically answering the question, what if, as in what if X happens, then what will I do? Some examples of risk, maybe your project is dependent on fundraising to generate the cost share. We see that a lot. But that cost share has not been raised by the time you submit your application. So you need to tell what you'll do if that money doesn't come in by the time your project gets underway. You need a plan B for that, and we would like for you to explain what that is. Maybe your project is structured around using university interns who will be selected and trained according to a very well thought out process. But what will you do if one or more of your interns drops out? What's your plan for replacing them mid-project? Or maybe your project is going to involve rehousing into brand new, beautiful museum quality collection storage furniture. But then there might be a delay in preparing the space. We see that a lot. Or the delivery of the cabinets. You can't order the cabinets until you have the money in hand, and then your supplier might say, well, we can't possibly meet that deadline because we have these other jobs to do. So what happens to the collection items then? If you've taken them out of the old area and put them in a temporary one, do you have a plan for extending that temporary location? How will they remain safe and secure while your timeline gets adjusted? There's no checklist of risk, but every project has them, and I think the best proposals that we see will show that the staff are aware of them and have thought through a plan for dealing with them. Right. The last topic I want to talk about today is relates to your project's intended results, another area of grant making that's getting lots and lots of attention these days in the federal world. Not only the results, but the way in which you'll measure your success in achieving them. As part of your work plan, we ask you to tell us how and with whom you'll be sharing your project results. So we want the goodness and the learning that come about as the result of your project to be as widely shared and understood as possible. So we ask you to include activities that will do that. But it's really the third section of your narrative that's all about your project's intended results. We've already noted that when the federal government gives you money, it wants there to be an improvement or a step forward or something getting better. And this is where you can explain what that will be. Going back to the questions we referenced a couple of slides ago, and we talked about defining the need, problem, or challenge that your project will address. If you said somebody will learn something, how will you know that they did? If collections will be better cared for, how will you be sure and how will you measure better? If you're digitizing collections to expand accessibility, how will you know when you've done that? And if your problem is related to certain segments of your community being better able to work together, how will you know when that's been achieved? So this focus on results and measuring success in meaningful ways is not new. It's been around for a long time. And unfortunately, it hasn't gotten easy. There's been a tremendous amount of work done on ways to measure success, and we as an agency are still working on this for ourselves. How do we take the good work that you've done as a grantee and use that to defend grant programs and use that to defend the existence of IMLS? And we've had some opportunities to do that lately, as you can imagine. For you as an applicant, though, we encourage you to consider thinking about using a logic model to explain your intended results and your plan for achieving them. This is not a requirement at this juncture, it's just a suggestion. And our experience has been that well-constructed logic models are easy to understand, and reviewers appreciate and respond very well to them. IMLS worked a few years ago with Indiana University, Purdue University of Indianapolis to create a tutorial, and it's called Shaping Outcomes, Making a Difference in Libraries and Museums. It's available for your use on our website, and the URL is in the online resources slide that we posted earlier. So if it's not the only way to go at logic models, but it's a helpful way because it's customized for museums and libraries. So you might want to take a look at that. So what are the takeaways from all this? Well, we talked about two categories of things to keep in mind. One, do the easy things. And again, we're very well aware that it's not as easy to do this as it might look because there are many steps, but it is pretty easy to follow instructions. Make good choices, make them early on, and check your math as you go so you're not trying to do all that in one big frenzy the week before the applications due. For the harder things, you want to leave some more time for these. If you apply to Museums for America, you will need to summarize your strategic plan. And that is an important thing, and you might need to get some help on that. Definitely spend time on defining your need, problem, or challenge. Remember that reviewers are going to be looking for how you declared it to be so. So what is the research that underlies your analysis there? Think hard and work hard on defining your activities. That is a decision that will follow the lifespan of the grant, and if you do it well up front, everything else is easy after that. Think about your risks when answering that what if question. What if something goes wrong? What will you do? And then think about your intended results and how you're going to measure them, and maybe use a logic model to do that. This is a list of all of us. We are a mighty band of 10 people here. Most of us come out of the museum world. We have not only huge respect for everything that you all do, but we've experienced the joy in doing it too. So we hope that you will call us and ask us any questions or talk through ideas. Each of us is attached to a grant program or two, so if you want to take a look at the notices of funding opportunities to see who's who and what's what, that works too. But this is an easy reference to get a hold of us. So that is what I wanted to share. And I would love if you all have some questions or you want to share your ideas or let me know what does this make sense or what things we didn't cover and how we could be helpful. And I'll go back to this contact slide.
Thanks, Connie. I also should have mentioned I was actually a reviewer for some of the grants a few years ago, and that was definitely a very interesting process reading them all. A lot of work went into them. So.
Well, thank you and thanks for bringing that up, Heather, because yeah, reviewers are crucial to this. I must have said the word 50,000 times. It's also a great way to get better at grant writing. You have 10 or 15 to look at in front of you, then the strengths and the weaknesses really pop out that way. But at any rate.
Yeah, I should say they weren't anything from New England, so there's no bias on that. But yeah, it was definitely kind of interesting to see exactly what people were looking for and how they went about trying to get it. So, okay, so we do have a couple questions.
Okay.
So Stephanie was wondering if IMLS offers any non-matching grants.
Oh, thank you for that question. Yes. At the moment, we have the non-match opportunity comes up in the funding level. We talked about some of our grants have two funding levels. For a grant for between $5,000 and $25,000, there's no match, and it's not only no match required, it's no match allowed. So we're looking for $25,000 projects there that can be completed in a year or two. There are some of our other programs where a match is not required for a certain funding level. National Leadership is that way for what we call our rapid prototyping grants. We want to encourage some experiments and try some, air quote, wild ideas to see how they shake out, and you don't have to match those. I think there's also not a matching requirement in our Native American, Native Hawaiian program. And our African American History and Culture program has the same split that Museums for America does, which is $5,000 to $25,000 does not require a match. We also have a new grant program called Museums Empowered, also a $5,000 to $25,000 that does not require a match. So yeah, that's you'll find out more about that when you look at those funding levels.
Okay, and then we do have a question from Julie. If a project isn't funded one year, can the applicant rewrite and resubmit in the following year? Do you have any advice?
Absolutely you can do that. In fact, one of the things I'm proudest of IMLS for is that we provide the reviewer comments verbatim. So if you write an application that went to field review, you had 3 people looking at it independently. They wrote comments and provided scores, and you get their feedback word for word. We really encourage reviewers to make constructive comments and suggestions for improvement, both for the ones that are likely to get funded and the ones that aren't, because that can make projects better. If your application goes to panel, then you get 6 reviews, so 3 field and 3 panel. We've heard and we see that people who pay attention to those reviews and make those improvements do much better the next year. It is also I won't say it's a good idea, it is not a bad idea to reference that you are reflecting the input from a previous reviewer. That sometimes people will say, well, should I tell that this is a resubmit or should I be quiet about that? You can do it any way you want, but if you do decide to talk about it as a resubmit and you have changed your project design or your some aspect of it in response to reviewer recommendation, that's a good thing to mention. So yes, by all means you can resubmit. We also, at the end of the letter where we say that you did not get an award, we give you a human being's name, email, and phone number. and to call to discuss the reviews and to discuss steps for going forward. And we hope, we love it when people do that. We might be able to share some observations that we made as program officers in panel that might not be in the written reviews. So we're happy to do that.
And you guys are also incredibly useful to call before you even submit it to talk over what's going on. You guys do have quite a few resources on your website. You guys do have webinars. You know, I think that's definitely something to keep in mind too, is like you guys are a resource to ask these questions of too.
Yes, and we truly do love it. I mean, that's you know, we have to be in little bitty offices here. We don't get to be in museums anymore, so we count on you guys to remind us of all of the good stuff.
Yes. And then there's a follow-up question on that one. For the Museums for All program, will it stay the same funding of $250K for 2018, or does that change?
Nope, it looks like it's going to stay at $250,000. It's not over until it's over and the NOFO is posted, of course. But right now we have no plans to change that. There are some discussions going on about some other tweaks to Museums for America, but I haven't heard anything yet about changing the cap. We'll have a better feeling about that when we see what the applications that came in this last year, how they've used that and what the spread has been like. But my guess is it will be the same.
Okay. Do you know when the FY19 guidelines will be released?
We are working on them now with a projected date of mid-September. Okay. And we believe that we will still have a December 1 deadline for applications. So that's been pretty much the way it's been. We do leave our previous year's guidelines up until the new ones are posted. So if anybody wants to go in and look at those and start thinking and planning, those resources are available. Also, all of last year's webinars are up too. So.
And then Emily asks, what are the biggest issues that reviewers see in grant applications, particularly for projects that are not funded?
Another great question. I would say disconnects or inconsistencies are what we hear complaints about, and frustration. You know, because reviewers want you to be successful too, right? There's no downsides, and nobody is sitting anywhere saying, "Well, I hope they don't get funded." Right? It's not, that never happens. But if there's a disconnect between what somebody says the problem is and what the activities identified in the work plan are, and then what the results are, that is probably the quickest way to get a low score. Another complaint that we hear and that we see is the lack of detail. And I know it's especially when it comes to terms for money. You know, somebody who says, "And I need $40,000 for supplies," that's probably not going to fly. You know, that really needs to be backed up with actual numbers. Or if somebody says, you know, art education in our community is just a disaster, and so we need to do this project. Well, that's not very compelling either. We need to have something more substantive than an opinion. So facts are good. Having a story to tell is another thing that reviewers have told us that they really appreciate. Here's the problem. Here's how we know there's a problem. This is what we propose to do about it. These are the things we're concerned about. This is how we will mitigate risk. These are the intended results, and here's how we're going to share it with the field. If you can keep that narrative in your head and make sure that all of the application parts all point to that kind of a theme, then that works well. I think that would be the most common things that we see.
Okay. And then Kate was wondering, to what extent in a Museum for America grant or another program, does an innovative approach to a problem need make a proposal more competitive, so not something new or something old?
A great question. In Museums for America, it does not need to be innovative. In national leadership, it does. And that is the philosophy that underlies those two programs. For Museums for America, the goal is to help museums live into their strategic plans. At a local level, we want the money to make a local impact. And if we fund essentially the same project in 15 different locations in 1 year, that's okay. We're happy to do a lot of rehousing, a lot of grade 4 history programming, a lot of exhibits. That is all okay because those communities need that and those museums are prepared to deliver it. In national leadership, the idea is we support projects that take on some kind of problem that plagues a good part of the museum field and really wrestles with that. This is where we see our research and our collaborations. Oftentimes universities will be involved or many museums will get together and work on something. And the idea is that they can come up with a solution or a model or a data set for that problem and communicate it, then all museums across the country can benefit by that. So local impact does not need to be innovative, needs to be solid, needs to help you help your community. National leadership, yeah, that's where we look for the innovation and the new ways of going at problems and creating tools that other people can use as a result.
Okay. And then Carolyn was asking, some grants are structured in two parts, as a planning grant followed by an implementation grant. I've actually seen this quite a bit for other grant organizations. Would you recommend approaching an IMLS grant this way, or are projects more likely to be funded if planning and implementation is combined into a single project?
We don't have the subcategories of planning and implementation, although yes, absolutely many agencies do. And in fact, on the library side of IMLS, they do. We don't do that over here, but we encourage planning in all of our project categories. So we are all about, if you want to put together a planning grant, that's terrific. It becomes problematic if planning and implementation are put together in certain circumstances, because how can you detail the implementation if you haven't done the planning yet? So in those kinds of cases, even though we don't tell you to do that, if it makes sense to do planning 1 year and then apply for implementation money the next, we're fine with that. You don't have to have a planning grant. You can go straight to an implementation if you've done that work on your own without outside funding. That works fine. Or if you've gotten NEH money for a planning grant and then you come to us for implementation, that works too. We usually opt to be on the less prescriptive side in our grant making, as we always come back to that notion of we want to help you be successful and we want to help museums serve their communities and do what they need to do.
So Stephanie asked the key question on this one. What are the preliminary things we have to sign up for in order to use grants.gov? This is definitely something that you want to start thinking about well in advance before actually even submitting your application.
Right. And in fact, this afternoon is good. So you cannot start it too early. 3 places you need to register. One is you have to have a DUNS number, and that is free. There will be ne'er-do-wells who will offer to get you that. There'll also be ne'er-do-wells who offer to register you with SAM.gov for a fee, and there's never a fee involved. It's always free. But at any rate, DUNS number you have to have in hand. Then you register with SAM.gov, and they will ask you for your DUNS number, so that's why that has to be in place. That process can take up to 2 weeks. They've gotten a lot faster at it recently, but I would still allow 2 weeks to hear back. As many places, as opportunities as you can imagine that there might be to make a typo or to have different information, you'll run up against it there. Is it World War II Museum with Roman numerals? Is it World War TWO? Is it World War Arabic numeral? All of that kind of thing. So you want to allow plenty of time for that. Then once you have an active registration, you go to grants.gov. And you have to have those other 2 pieces before you go there. And you register there and identify your point of contact and all of your business people. And you don't have to have a an application in process or even one in mind to do that. It's just really, really good to get that done in advance. SAM registrations expire every year. And it absolutely, I think these days you can't even begin to think about submitting an application with an expired SAM registration. The systems won't let you do that. So you want to make sure you follow, pay attention to those emails that come that tell you that you need to renew your SAM registration. Make sure that that gets taken care of. And the last thing I want to say on that is make sure you know who has the password and the username for that, because we hear sad stories about leadership has changed or the person that used to have that retired, and here we are, we're ready to upload our grant. Nobody knows what the grants.gov password is. We have no access to that. We're users of it just like you all are. So, but those are the three places.
Okay, Charles' question, I'm not sure. I think I need some follow-up on that one. To what extent is public access into collection more or less relevant to the preservation of the collection from deterioration? Charles, is this in particular to a particular grant? I'm just curious on that one.
I think I know what he means.
Okay, good.
Because I dwell in this world too, and Charles would just jump in if I am not getting this right. Okay, grant application. What we have in fact, I am working on this at this moment, not this very moment, but we had a big meeting about it yesterday, and we'll go back to that work tomorrow. What do we call the project category that addresses work with collections? And it is going to be called, what we're proposing is collection stewardship and access. And we're going to put those together. And we want to make it easy for people to construct a project that may have preservation, collections care, collections management, and access rolled in together if it suits them. You know, we didn't want to make it separate, and we didn't want to put those goals as oppositional. We want to make it as easy as possible for the museum to decide its priorities, and we like to talk instead about what we support. And we support digitization. Not everybody does anymore, but we do. We support collections management systems, CMS systems. We support every level of collections care, from surveys and environmental improvements to conservation treatments, planning for all of that, of course, but constructing databases to make information about collections more easily discoverable and usable. So I hope that helps. We would not put an emphasis on one over the other. We would rather look for the proposals that address both of those needs well and defensively. Does that help?
Does anybody have any last-minute questions while we have Connie on the phone? Not that she isn't available anytime to give a call if you do.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. No?
No, you did answer quite a few weighty ones, though, so.
All right. Well, thanks again, Heather and Scarlett, for the invite. I really appreciate it. And if other questions occur to anybody that's thinking about a grant, please do give us a call. I know that when NEMA has its annual meeting, it's like days before the deadline. So,
yeah, that usually falls. Yeah, we've got complaints about that one.
yeah. So don't wait to get to us then, but talk to us now, and we would be thrilled and happy to help in any way that we can.
All right. Thank you, Connie. And I want to put a plug in for our workshop season. If you want to join us for an in-person workshop, check out the NEMA website. We have workshops throughout New England on a variety of subjects. And next month's Lunch with NEMA will be Cinnamon from the Abbey Museum, talking about things that they wish they taught in grad school. We all have those type of moments. So if there's any last-minute things, there's a bunch of thank you, Connie. very helpful. And the resources will be available on the NEMA website, all those links that were on there earlier, along with the recording of today's session if you needed to do a refresher or share it with someone else. That would be great. All right, thanks, Connie. And I guess we'll probably see you in the fall then at the NEMA conference in Stamford, Connecticut.
That would be lovely.
All right.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care, everybody.
All right. Bye.
Bye.